Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's broadcast with us here at PwC Sweden. Today, we will focus on the increasingly pressing climate challenges faced by business. Heat waves, drought, storms, and floods not only pose significant environmental risks, but also disruptions for the business sector. I'm delighted because today I have my colleague Alessandro Bocca with us today for a inspirational and informative conversation. Alessandro is one of PwC's climate economists here at PwC. He has a long experience from working on climate risk and resilience, and I know he will share valuable advice and strategies to prepare for your business for future climate challenges. So sit back and join us when we explore how we can reduce vulnerability and create a resilient and future-proof business strategy. Welcome, Alessandro.
Hi, great to be here.
Yeah, everything good with you?
Everything good?
Yeah.
And my coffee?
Yeah, you're fantastic. To kick us off, could you introduce yourself a little bit and your role here at PwC and the climate work you are focusing on?
Sure. So I'm Alessandro. I'm from Italy. Moved here a couple of years ago, a little bit more than that. Before I was in London studying. And I'm an economist. I started with economics and then I sort of specced into the environmental part of it. And here at PwC, I'm a climate economist. So working with climate risks, carbon markets, the intersection of policy and modeling, trying to add a little bit of numbers to heat waves, droughts, and all the hazards that you described before. And I'm surrounded by engineers. I'm the only economist in my team, at least here in Sweden. And when I joined, historically, there's been a lot of focus on climate mitigation, reducing emissions, decarbonizing supply chains. But now there's and that's, of course, very important and still very important. But now there's a strong complementary focus on climate adaptation, sort of the outside-in perspective. What does a warming world brings you when it comes to risks and opportunities? And I try to model that. And that's what I've been doing with clients. And that, of course, means safeguarding your assets, see what assets and sites are most exposed, and trying to get opportunities out of it. And of course, there's this shift that's being brought by the regulatory momentum in Brussels, at least when it comes to Europe. You have CSRD, EU taxonomy, regulations that, of course, have a longer section when it comes to climate adaptation and the little disclosure requirements that you have to be compliant with, but also real-world losses. Like if you think of the Beverly Hills wildfires, that's a big coverage news that has been in homes of many Swedes as well.
I mean, you're describing a topic, an area that's, I bet, a lot of see. You can really feel the urgency here. Can you tell us a little bit about like the physical climate risk and connect it maybe to the business and what business leaders need to or should focus on today?
Sure. So when we talk about climate risks, so usually we divide into what you can see with your eyes and what's too long-term and too maybe slow, even if it's not slow at all, but you cannot see one day. So acute physical risks are the ones that you can see with your eyes, like a flood, a heat wave, a storm. You feel it in your day-to-day. And then there's the chronic, longer ones, the shifts in long-term patterns in warming globally, sea level rise, ocean acidification. And of course, the acute ones usually get the front page, or at least most of the time. And to give you a sense of scale when it comes to the impact on businesses, since we're in Sweden, in 2021, in August, one rainstorm in one region of Sweden brought 1.6 billion SEK in claims. That's huge for just a small part in just one hazard. You can have many rainstorms. And that's August, which is usually not as cold as, Stockholm winter. And when it comes to the global perspective, the picture is even more grim. In 2023, you have $280 billion in global losses related to natural catastrophes. So it's a problem that is not happening tomorrow, is happening now. So I would suggest that if you're both a CSO or a CFO, you should be listening.
I mean, what you're describing is a real sense of urgency, but also when it comes to risks, I mean, it hasn't happened yet. So my question for you, from your perspective, is how prepared are businesses for these risks that you are describing? Are the business life, are they thinking about it?
Yeah, I would say awareness and preparedness are two slightly different things. Businesses are aware, at least in Sweden, that climate risks are a thing. There's a general knowledge of what they are. Maybe not the acute and chronic differences, but more or less there's an idea. But when it comes to preparedness, it's very uneven. Businesses might know that a supplier in Amsterdam is a bit more prone to floods, but when it comes to global supply chains, what I'm seeing in my day-to-day is that there's not real knowledge when it comes to what sites are most vulnerable, what increases in the different intensities and frequencies of these hazards, where are located the supply chain nodes that are most vulnerable, and what to do about it. So investment in resilience, performing a cost-benefit analysis to set up a flood wall or a green roof.
But you mentioned there's a difference between awareness and preparedness.
Yeah.
So if you don't do anything, if you don't address these questions, I mean, what is the effects on companies?
I would say you are willing to face a growing unmanaged risk that affects all your assets and businesses. So basically, that would mean it's multi-phase. So you would have direct damages to your assets, disrupted operations. Some of your suppliers might not be able to send you the goods and critical inputs that you would need. And insurance premiums might go up. They definitely have been going up. I come from Italy, there are parts in Italy that, especially for the agricultural sector, in the central and southern part, are uninsurable. The premiums are so high that the people owning the land will not be paying those premiums. And then you have the worst case scenario, like a stranded asset, a site that is so vulnerable that it loses all its value or mostly all its value. And that's, of course, the worst case scenario, but even less tangible ones, like productivity losses due to heat waves. We've seen factories, especially with workers working outside, that adjust their working time to sort of have an alignment with when it's not too hot, especially again in Italy when it's like 35 during the summer, or Spain, Portugal, staying in Europe. And of course, you have the reputational side. If you don't do anything, if you don't perform your climate risk assessment, your scenario analysis, then you wouldn't have the data to disclose on it. And then CSRD, EU taxonomy, you wouldn't be compliant at all. And that's reputational risk that shakes investor confidence, access to capital may be downgraded a little bit. So it's really, I wouldn't go that path.
No, many different perspectives, of course. But is there any specific sector or part of businesses, like financial sector or construction sectors, that are more affected by the climate risks, or is this for everybody?
I would say there's not a multinational supply chain that is not affected at all.
Okay.
What you see is that, of course, if you're in real estate, that's like your business depends on assets. If the assets on the physical side are getting stranded or really affected, then that's a high impact sector. But you'd have mid-cap manufacturing companies that have suppliers in Pakistan. They get flooded on the tier 5 suppliers, and then they cannot operate. So it affects everyone. Of course, there are different scales, and the bigger and more vulnerable examples are, of course, real estate, large manufacturing companies that are dependent on critical inputs that are stressed by climate change.
So everybody is affected, is what I hear. But what would you say? What actions should leaders take to moving from awareness to resilience or preparedness? I mean, how do you do that?
Well, awareness is already good.
Yeah.
So knowing that this is a thing and a risk and being willing to manage it, or at least grasp it. The standard, most appropriate way of going about it is performing a climate scenario analysis. So this is not a one-day exercise. It's a structured process of stressing these risks across all assets when it comes to physical risks, across different scenarios and time horizons. And you need different scenarios because climate pathways are different with different global warming levels. So the idea is to prepare for different climate futures at different time horizons. Usually you start with a shorter one, like 2030, and you go until a longer one, like 2050, 2100 even sometimes. Of course, climate variability gets a little bit iffy after 2050, but you get what I mean. And I would start there. I mean, start with like an inventory of your assets, risks that are more material to you, and then you have to perform a climate scenario analysis.
What would you say? What are the biggest like misconceptions when it comes to when you have conversations with the companies and leaders? Because I mean, what you've been talking about is the connection between financial losses and climate risks. Is that does everybody understand that, or is there any other like misconceptions about this area that? Do you understand what I'm looking for? Like,
I think the bigger one is that I'm working mostly with clients in the Nordics, not always, but and there's always the misconception that okay, floods might be a thing, but heat waves not really, and that's just because the baseline is lower. Like again, coming from Italy, summers there are much warmer than summer here, but doesn't automatically mean that the difference that creates a heat wave or a perceived temperature increase here is null in Sweden. So I think a big misconception is that hazards and climate risks that are usually associated to, for instance, the Mediterranean area of Europe suddenly don't apply to Sweden or the Nordics. Another one is that businesses tend to approach this, or had approached this, as a nice to have. Now it's really a compliance must for both the compliance, the reporting compliance, and the strategy. Like you need to have a prioritized asset list, and there you need to invest. Because of course you cannot invest everywhere. Adaptation is costly. It's more costly not to do it, but it's still an investment. So having a list of 5 assets that are most stressed by climate change, that's where it's really important.
The move from need to nice to have to need to have do. Interesting. But to focus a little bit more on the work you do, and I mean what we do at PwC and the scenario analysis. Tell us a little bit about the Pulse, the Spotlight, the tool that we use, because that's really interesting. And I think really emphasize on how it can help our viewers when it comes to this topic. I mean, that's why we're here, right?
Indeed.
So, so please.
Yeah, so 1.5 years ago, I think it was midsummer, going back from the train from Gislaved to Stockholm, I started coding a little bit, and Pulse is the result. So it's a tool I developed, stands for Physical Risk and Losses Simulation Engine. And what it does is that it performs the climate scenario analysis that we were discussing before for physical risks at like in an instant, because it's an algorithm instead of doing it manually and on paper. The idea is that you have a lot of meteorological data in the backend, and you use that data to provide climate risk values that from cover to cover map the whole climate scenario analysis. And we usually have 2 assessments, a geospatial one. And to give you an example, the results of the geospatial one would be you have an asset in London, let's say an office building where you do R&D. And in 2030, in this climate scenario, in this climate pathway, the increase in floods will be, 7%. That's the first part. And we do it for all assets globally. Doesn't matter if it's own operations or their whole supply chain, like retailers, suppliers, tier 4 to tier 1. And then the second part is the financial one. So I think the more interesting part, maybe I'm biased because I'm an economist, so I kind of like the monetary figures, but is to use regression analysis and insurance data to tie to the 7%, 8%, 6% in flooding increase that we were discussing before in London, a monetary figure. So what's the financial impact at the asset level? And that can be expressed in asset value at risk, cost of repair. But basically, we find that we are the most convincing, and we can put more pressure, and we drive the bigger transition when we attach like a financial value, a financial impact, and we just don't say, it will be more hot, like it will be warmer due to heat waves. When you start to attach a real asset damage and a real financial value, that's where CFO starts listening.
And connect back to what you said before, that this is for all sectors. Like it's and to maybe give an even more concrete example here. Who is using this? Is it both like private equity and large industries, or the Pulse tool? And how? What value does the tool help, like private equity and large industries?
Yeah, I've been lucky enough to work with both.
Oh, okay.
The diversity of the client base that uses Pulse is really nice to have, because it makes my Mondays a little bit different as months pass. But the process remains exactly the same. So the tool is the tool. That doesn't change. I code the same way. But the use case is slightly different, or at least why they use it, the value. Private equity companies usually have either use Pulse to stress test their whole portfolio. So they have funds, they have a lot of investees, they collect all the investees' assets, and we run the analysis. Or they use it for a transaction, so a more ad hoc assessment. They target a company they want to acquire. They want to make sure they're not financially vulnerable to climate risks, or not that much. So we run only on the coordinates of the target company. And that's usually the private equity side. And the financial sector as a whole, like banks as well, like pension funds is another one. And for industrials, especially larger ones, like global value chains, Pulse, again, it stays exactly the same in terms of process, but the results is that you really can focus on having a short list of hotspots. Like this is, like we have 10,000 assets. Where do I invest money to make it safe? Because again, if you have a headquarters in Stockholm, you might not even know exactly what happens in tier 5 suppliers. So we sort of give the figures across the whole supply chain, and there's no real weighting. Like to us, tier 5 suppliers or an important retailer is just as vulnerable, interesting, important as a headquarter or an office building.
Oh, really interesting. We talked a little bit earlier about that. You said that this is like a leadership question. So, I mean, let's say you're a CFO or a CSO listening today, and what are the practical steps, and how do you get started now?
I would say start small, especially if you're a CFO instead of a CSO, because chief sustainability officers, if they still exist, have an idea of what climate risk is. So they probably know that I have to perform a climate scenario analysis. But the advice to both is, if you haven't done nothing, good that you're aware. So start with short list of risks. Don't start with tropical cyclones, especially if you are in Sweden. Start with the usuals like floods, storms, extreme weather events that we all know, and then move forward with the others. Pick 2 climate scenarios, 3 time horizons, and perform the analysis. And again, if this gets too complicated, you can reach out to us and use Pulse.
Reach out to us and use Pulse. Yeah. Thank you so much, Alessandro, for sharing valuable insights on this topic. And if you, as a viewer, want to read more about this topic and have more information, you can find some links here in the comment section, or just follow Alessandro's advice and reach out to him and his team at PwC. Thanks for watching, and see you in the future. Bye-bye.